The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
On today's Farm Connections, we traveled to my alma mater, the University of Minnesota. I had an excellent thought-provoking discussion with Ed Ussett, an expert on farm marketing, trading, pricing, and futures. Trust me, you'll learn something from this conversation. We'll also meet with a number of young people who are preparing for exciting careers in agriculture. Stay tuned, we've got a lot coming your way on this Farm Connections.
Farm Connections on KSMQ, sponsored in part by the Cedars of Austin, a senior living community. We even have a retired farmers club. Independent, assisted, and memory care apartments. Learn more at cedarsofaustin.com. Will Mahler, the ag attorney, has been representing dairy farms in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin for 37 years. Will Mahler, the ag attorney's office, is in Rochester, and Will is a proud partner of Farm Connections. Thanks, Will Mahler.
Ed Ussett is a grain marketing specialist at the University of Minnesota, St. Paul. He studied the marketing and financial side of agriculture for decades, and he's been a valuable resource for farmers of all stages of their careers. I had a very illuminating conversation with him on the St. Paul campus.
Ed, what's your job here?
Well, I'm a grain marketing specialist for the University of Minnesota, and I do a lot of teaching on the topic of grain marketing. I do it for farmers, I do it for bankers, for crop insurance types. I travel throughout the state. There's not many corners of this state I can say I haven't been to yet. And I also get outside the state to the neighboring states.
Why is grain marketing or commodity marketing important?
Well, have you been around this summer, Dan? We've had a little movement in the markets. And we always have something to trade. This year in particular, one of the harshest droughts we've seen in the last 100 years has sent prices skyrocketing. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of opportunity and a lot of risk.
I remember when you came to southern Minnesota and put on a presentation. Actually, you did it for me and some of my other instructors in the farm management program. And at that time, we were happy if we could find a nickel, a dime, a quarter. Now what are you looking for?
We look for more today. The world has changed in the last 5 years. I came out with a book in 2007 called Grain Marketing is Simple. And I still get compliments on it, but there was one thing I could change. The book is filled with references to $2.50 corn and $6 soybeans. And that world seems to have left us. We're now talking about $5 and $6 corn or higher. We're talking about beans in the teens, $12 to $15 soybeans. With those higher prices, margins are different too. We used to think in terms of trying to find an extra dime in marketing. Now I talk about trying to find a quarter or 50 cents.
You spoke of history, and we've come from, even in the 80s, $1 corn. Everybody in the audience wants to know this, and we don't expect you to know it, but maybe you can hit on it. Are we going to ever go to a lower price than we are now?
Well, ever is a long time, so I hate to go there. But I think the higher prices are here to stay. Now, keep in mind, people hear that and they think that we'll never go below, $6 corn is here to stay. No, we could go back to $4, maybe $3.50 in the foreseeable future, a few years out. And with today's production costs, that would be a bad bear market. We have a new world here, and we have to sort of shake the old numbers free. Having said that, today $3.50 corn would crush a lot of people.
It used to be a worthy goal if we could get up to it and make a lot of money. Now it would be a disaster.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, it would.
Talk about volatility and the risk. What kind of risks do our producers have in today's market?
Well, just think of the price of corn. It's been as low as I would say southern Minnesota, $4.50 corn earlier this year. I think we got that low, and we've been up to $8 all in the last year. The good news about the current environment is that even at the lowest prices, most producers were making money, and at the best of prices, we were having our best years ever. That's different. That's not guaranteed to stay. That type of volatility. We've had years, Dan, when the best price in the year was barely profitable and all the other prices were unprofitable. I guess I'll take the higher volatility and the higher price.
How does a producer protect him or herself on that volatility?
Well, we talk a lot about hedging. I talk a lot about hedging with futures, hedging with options contracts. Farmers are not entirely comfortable with the concept of hedging, of having a futures account. Some people might be surprised to learn that elevator in Adams and elevators all throughout the state, hedging for them is standard operating procedure. They don't wonder whether or not to hedge, they hedge. That means that every bushel of grain they buy from farmers, they're laying off that risk with the sale of a futures contract. Every sale of cash grain they make, say to a river terminal, they cover that with the purchase of futures. And you might say, why? They hedge everything? Your typical country elevator, they're not trying to make money by being right in the market, playing the market. They want to make their money by buying grain, blending it, taking poor grades and blending them up to better grades, and a margin in handling the grain. That's where they want to make their money. They want to put the price risk aside. That can take them under.
Have you talked to your producers about crop insurance and how that fits into their marketing plan?
Oh, we talk about it all the time in pre-harvest marketing. It's critical. In a year like this, with an incredible drought, we've yet to put the numbers to it, but I think it's going to be one of the worst droughts in the last century. Crop insurance is vital. The number I can't understand is crop revenue insurance is very popular. They tell me that 90%, statistics tell us that 90% of the acres are covered by crop insurance, and it makes me wonder, what are the other 10% thinking? How are they going to handle a year like this with this sort of problem? So crop insurance, to me, it's the first step in marketing. In putting together a marketing plan, I buy crop insurance.
With the high production costs, it becomes something very important, doesn't it?
It's critical. It's absolutely critical.
And that's the first step. What do you recommend is the second step?
Well, in my world of marketing, I divide things into pre-harvest actions and post-harvest actions. We're close to harvest, so ideally we'd talk about post-harvest right now, but the fact is I start before harvest. Step one in a pre-harvest marketing plan is buy crop insurance. Step two, know your production costs. I tell people you just got that sort of establishes targets for what sort of price is making my operation money. Now, as I said, Dan, it's easy last couple of years. We calculate a production cost and all our opportunities seem to be north of that. And but that's not always the case. And so we calculate our production costs and sort of set some price objectives based on that. After harvest, in post-harvest marketing, I think about things like my storage costs. I think about things that I spend 2 weeks of class on carrying charges and basis and how that figures in.
Interest.
To marketing. Interest, all these factors come into play.
What's your explanation, in a nutshell, of basis?
Well, simply the difference between your price, wherever you are, be it Adams, Minnesota, Jackson, Minnesota, Fergus Falls, Minnesota, the price in your market relative to the futures price. It's important, particularly to hedgers like the elevator at Adams. It's important to them because they aren't flat price traders. As I said, they buy your grain, they buy the farmer's grain, and they sell futures. They don't care if the price of corn, if you're a hedger, you don't care if the price of corn is $4 or $8. That doesn't matter to you. What matters is the relationship between your two positions. You own cash grain, you've sold futures, and that relationship is what? That's the basis. Hedgers think basis, flat price traders. Most farmers think about the flat price, but the hedgers think about basis.
Of course, the end user is another concept. For example, livestock producers, ethanol plants. Do you work with them, and what advice do you have there?
I don't work a lot with ethanol plants or livestock producers. They have similar challenges. I will tell you, on for example, ethanol plants, they're a processor. In all grain elevators, I can say almost categorically, every grain elevator, like in Adams and other places, they hedge. Grain exporters hedge. Many processors, soybean crushers, generally hedge. Flour millers turning wheat into flour, they hedge. Ethanol producers, maybe, maybe not. They're more selective. I've talked to different players in the industry. Some adhere to strict hedging regimens, some do not. And they're in a little different risk profile because of that. Livestock producers are just the opposite of a grain producer. To a grain producer, they're worried about the price they sell at. Livestock producer or a dairy operation, grain is their input cost. So they look at hedging a little differently. They're looking at an opportunity to lock in a low price, not a high price on their inputs.
This year in particular, we've heard about inventories being brought down of corn and soybeans. And along with that, demand reduction in the past is what we've called it, but this year, in some cases, we've called it demand destruction. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I like that new term. This is the function of a market. When we have a short crop, a smaller crop, prices rise, they rise quickly, and we start to ration that demand. There's just not, we don't have a 14 billion bushel corn crop and the problem of wondering how to get rid of it. We're going to have a 10.5 or 11 billion bushel corn crop, and someone's not going to get their corn. It might be a country that imports from us. It's going to be some ethanol plants, and I'm sure you're well aware of the crunch going on in pork and cattle and dairy. It's a good way to characterize it, and you are right. Stocks are very tight. They'll continue tight throughout the year, and by next spring, this topic of basis is going to be very interesting. I think that next spring, and here I'll offer a bold prediction for you. I don't know if it's that bold because it's happened the last 2 years. Basis in southern Minnesota will go to overs again. That is, your cash price will be higher than the futures price. It's a big move.
And a far cry from what we had in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
Oh yeah, overs. To have local cash prices in southern Minnesota over the futures price, in the case of corn, it happened in 1995-96 for a brief time. And beyond that, you have to go to the last 2 years to see that happen. But I think it'll happen again next year. You could see cash prices 20, 30, 50 cents over the May or July futures contracts next spring.
That is really a reversal. That's a 180 from where we've come from.
Yeah.
But Ed, that's really my concern. When we talk about demand destruction, demand is what took us to that, of a positive basis. If destruction leaves, if we sell breeding stock of beef animals, swine herds, poultry herds, or if we lose export markets, to me that's destruction, and will we get it back?
We'll get it back, but the scenario you're laying out speaks to why in a drought year like this, analysts, that you'll hear the term short crop, long tail. And what happens is a short crop, you're destroying a crop, as we did this summer. We had too much sunshine, not enough rain. We hurt the corn crop, and prices adjusted very quickly. Now the long tail is typically in these years, once we've come to terms with that smaller crop, we start to drift lower. And part of that process is we've destroyed demand. And it takes time to rebuild that. Once we destroy it, we start to trade the fact that demand is going away through the year. And then we don't get a spike up in demand. It takes time. It takes a year, 2 years, 3 years to rebuild it.
That is a nice description of that long tail. And that's the part that concerns me, Ed. On that long tail, if as we're tapering down on the price farmers can receive, at the same time our input costs have either stayed the same or gone up,
yes,
there's a point where that crosses that I'm very concerned about the farmer and his profitability. What can we do about that?
Well, there are opportunities today to start thinking about pricing next year's crop. I'll be the first to admit that early sales of the crop the last few years hasn't been the right decision. Droughts are difficult to predict, and yet here we have, for example, December 2013 corn futures, maybe $6.30, take off a basis in your part of the world and the southeastern part of Minnesota, take off a basis of 40 cents. That's $5.90 cash corn. I think that's better than production costs for most of your listeners. And am I predicting that's the high? I'm not that good, but maybe it's a good place to start.
To cover some of those input costs,
yeah,
cover some of the rent and those things.
Yeah.
We also have an audience in southwest Minnesota. Any differences between southeast and southwest on that marketing and the grain demand?
The principles are the same. Southwest doesn't, the basis in southwestern Minnesota is generally a little weaker. Eastern Minnesota has that favorable influence from the river. You get in southwestern Minnesota, you're too far from the river. So basis might be a nickel to 10 cents a bushel less, although I have to tell you, these new ethanol plants that have sprouted up throughout the state have been great levelers on basis.
Definitely changed the way grain is marketed and sold.
Yeah, and it'll continue to change.
Great advice, and I hope our audience appreciates the time you spent. I sure do. Thank you very much, Ed.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Good
Appreciate
information.
Another person I caught up with at the University of Minnesota was Sarah Marketon, who we last saw as a student participant in the World Food Institute. Now she's a freshman at the U and this year's Minnesota Pork Ambassador.
Sarah, you just started a brand new term as Minnesota Ambassador of Pork. Is that how you say that?
Yeah, I'm the 2013 Minnesota Pork Ambassador, and I'm really excited to talk with consumers about how we raise our animals on our farm, and also meet with some pig farmers themselves and learn about how I can best serve them over the next year.
Well, tell us how you were selected.
Well, there was a long process down at Farm Fest, which was in the beginning of August in Redwood Falls, and we did a personal interview. We had a public presentation, and mine was on advocating for pork, and then we did a group round. It was a surprise. We didn't know what it was. We were split into groups, and we did a press conference about current issues within the pork industry.
Well, congratulations on your choice.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
The last time we talked to you, we caught up with you at the University of Minnesota campus before you became a freshman, and you were going on a great journey.
Yeah, a couple summers ago I went to Ethiopia. I was an intern through the World Food Prize and spent 2 months there at the International Livestock Research Institute.
How does that experience help you to be Minnesota Pork Ambassador?
Well, that helps because I know that it's important for Minnesota pig farmers to produce the product that they're producing to help feed people here in Minnesota, the United States, and around the world, because a lot of the pork produced in Minnesota is exported.
And that export component has been growing over the last few years.
Yeah, it's definitely been growing. You know, there a lot of Minnesota pig farmers we've actually increased the number of pigs that we're producing. We used to be ranked 3rd. We're now ranked 2nd, still behind Iowa. So Iowa's 1st, we're 2nd, and North Carolina is now 3rd.
What's the most enjoyable part of your new job?
The most enjoyable part is everything. I don't think I could pick one part that I love the most. It's just being able to advocate for something that I love and something that I work with every single day with my family. It's so much fun, and I'm honored to serve as a 2013 Pork Ambassador.
Tell us about the organization that you work with.
Well, the Minnesota Pork Board and the Minnesota Pork Producers are the 2 organizations that I work closely with. The pork producers do a lot of the legislative work. Pork Board does a lot of research, education, kinds of things. And so I work with the employees there to just make sure that I'm going to the different events that they're hosting, and if anybody is looking to have the Minnesota Pork Ambassador, then they would go through those groups to just request that we come. There's 3 of us, so I'm the Pork Ambassador. We have Matt Welter, who is the 2nd runner-up, and then we have Lloyd Lesmeister, who is the 1st runner-up. So we all work together and go to those different events that they are hosting.
Well, wonderful. It's going to be a very busy year.
That is for sure, and I'm looking forward to it.
And what a great opportunity for you. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you.
While visiting the University of Minnesota, I had the pleasure of meeting a bona fide celebrity, this year's Princess K of the Milky Way, Christine Reitzma. She shared her coronation experience and described her responsibilities as a dairy princess.
Christine, thanks for taking a minute to talk to Farm Connections about your new role. Tell us about it.
Well, I am the 59th Princess K of the Milky Way, and what I do is I serve as Minnesota's Goodwill Ambassador for the dairy industry. So I will travel around the state throughout the coming year, talking to both people in the cities who have no farm connection, as well as talking at many banquets and being a guest speaker.
So tell us about when the crown came down on your head. What did it feel like?
Euphoria. I was completely honored and exhilarated to have the opportunity to represent all of Minnesota's dairy farmers, as well as the whole dairy industry.
And now with your new job, what's the most enjoyable part of it?
Well, being able to go out and meet and talk with consumers about not only the importance of drinking milk, but how that milk comes to be about. You know, talking to school-age kids about how the milking process happens, and some of them are amazed that milk comes from cows and not from the grocery store. So it makes it a fun learning opportunity for them to learn about pasteurization as well as the cow itself.
Well, earlier I overheard you talking about watching the video of Ellie Thatcher, the very first Princess K of the Milky Way, which was interviewed by Farm Connections,
Yes.
and how you used that. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, actually the other finalists and myself had the opportunity to study that particular interview, and we just kind of basically took notes about how she answered questions, as well as learning about her history and how much the dairy industry has changed from 59 years ago to today.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Now what's next? What are you going to do in this year of rain?
Well, throughout my year, I will participate in over 100 dairy events. So I will be going into classrooms, talking to school-age children about dairy and how good milk is for you, as well as going around the state, just basically serving as an advocate for the dairy industry.
And another special thing at the State Fair, you were sculptured. Tell us about that experience.
Yes, I was one of the butterheads this year, and each finalist and myself got to spend our 6 to 8 hours in the cooler getting our heads carved out of 90 pounds of dairy butter. So it was an amazing opportunity to connect to consumers and share how the butter came about, as well as how hard the farmers worked to help make that butter.
And where is that sculpture?
It's actually at home in my freezer, taking up a lot of meat room.
Well, I wish you a great rain this year, and please be a great ambassador for the dairy industry.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Christine.
Thank you.
Now let's meet our next FFA Student Leader of the Week, Jared Lumen, who you may remember from last season when he was a high school student in Goodhue. Now he's studying at the University of Minnesota.
My name is Jared Lumen from Goodhue, and last time I was on the Farm Connections, I was actually a senior in high school. And here I am again at the University of Minnesota St. Paul, majoring in agricultural education. I hope to return to my family farm in Goodhue and hopefully work a little bit with ag industry after my graduation in 2016. FFA has really changed my life, and anybody who gets involved with it past the chapter level can really see how important and how incredible it really is. So I wanted to take this opportunity through the Minnesota FFA to give that opportunity to grow and experience the things that I have to others throughout the Minnesota. FFA is an opportunity to meet people across the state. Some of my best friends are from over like 4 hours away from me. I know people. I've met not only like friends, but important business connections and networking events that I can use throughout the rest of my life and my career, and hopefully within ag industry. Also, I've been able to become a more people person. I used to be one of the more shy kids, and through the FFA I've really grown a lot as an individual and kind of helped recognize who I am and what I want to do in my future.
Thanks for joining me on my visit to the University of Minnesota. I came here to participate on a panel of ag alumni, but got the added bonus of seeing some familiar faces and learning new things. Please come back next week for more exploration and conversation on Farm Connections.